In 1954, before the electric freezer reached most farms, a family's survival through winter lived underground. 10 feet below the kitchen, in a stone-walled room that never froze, sat everything they would need until spring. Number 7 kept edges fresh for 8 months with no refrigeration, and almost nobody alive today would recognize how. Number 3 was a skill every farm wife knew, yet you cannot buy it in any store now. These cellars fed families through blizzards and lean years when the nearest market was a frozen day's drive away. But when refrigerators and supermarkets arrived, we filled that cellar with junk and forgot what it was for. Before we count down, hit that subscribe button because your great-grandparents knew something we have completely lost. Let's begin with number 30. Number 30. Bins of potatoes buried in sand. No root cellar earned its name without the potato bin, a wooden crate half filled with dry sand where a family tucked away 300 or 400 pounds each October. Buried up to their shoulders in that cool grit, the potatoes stayed firm and dark, tricked into believing spring would never come. A 100-pound sack cost around $1.50 in 1953, but most farms grew their own. The rule was simple: keep them cold, keep them dark, and never let them touch the frost. Children were sent down with a basket and a candle, digging out enough for supper while the earthy smell of dirt and skins filled the stairwell. That single bin fed a family from harvest, clear through to seed time, one shovelful at a time. Number 29. Barrels of winter apples. Long before cold storage made apples a year-round fruit, the cellar held them by the barrel. Farm wives chose only the hard keepers, the Baldwins and Winesaps and Northern Spies, wrapping the finest in newspaper so one rotting apple could not spoil the lot. Layered in straw, a good barrel would last until March, the fruit slowly softening into something sweeter than any store apple today. A bushel cost roughly $1 in the early 1950s, though a farm with its own trees paid nothing but labor. The smell was unmistakable, that heady cider perfume that met you at the bottom of the stairs. Children snuck down for a forbidden apple, and mothers baked pies from fruit picked half a year earlier. When supermarkets began shipping crisp apples in every month, the barrel emptied for good. Number 28. Carrots packed in damp sand. Pull a carrot in November and it would shrivel to leather within weeks on a shelf. So the farm wife layered them in boxes of moist sand, roots not touching, tops trimmed to a stub, and set them in the coldest corner. The damp sand kept them plump and sweet for months, as if they were still growing in the ground. This trick showed up in every county extension pamphlet of the era, passed from mother to daughter like scripture. A bushel of carrots was worth pennies, but their sweetness in a February stew was priceless. You reached blind into that cold, gritty box and pulled out a carrot as crisp as the day it left the row. Bagged supermarket carrots ended the ritual, and the sand boxes were carried out for good. Number 27. Turnips heaped in the cold corner. Humble and unloved, the turnip was the cellar's insurance policy against a hungry March. Farm families grew rows of them because they asked for nothing, stored for nearly the whole winter, and filled a pot when little else remained. Heaped loose in the coldest corner or buried in sand like their cousins, turnips held firm while fancier vegetables gave out. Mashed with butter, dropped into stews, or boiled alongside a bit of salt pork, they carried the working farm through the lean weeks. A whole winter's supply cost almost nothing to grow. Children groaned at the sight of them, but mothers knew a full turnip bin meant no one went to bed empty. Today, the turnip has all but vanished from the American table, a casualty of plenty. Number 26. Waxed rutabagas. The rutabaga was the turnip's bigger, sweeter cousin, and the smart farm wife gave it special treatment. Many were dipped in melted paraffin wax, sealing the root against the drying air so it kept solid deep into spring. That waxy coat, cracked open at the kitchen table, revealed golden flesh still juicy months after harvest. Grown cheaply by the row, rutabagas were the poor family's dependable staple, mashed with potatoes or simmered until sweet. In parts of the upper Midwest and New England, no winter cellar was complete without a pile of them gleaming under their wax. The smell of one boiling filled the whole house. Waxed rutabagas still appear in a few produce aisles, ghosts of a cellar tradition, but almost no one keeps them the old way anymore. Number 25. Braids of onions hanging from the rafters. Onions never touched the damp cellar floor. Instead, they hung overhead, their dried tops braided into long ropes looped over nails and beams. Kept cool and dry, a well-cured braid lasted the entire winter, each onion pulled off as needed. Farm wives learned to plait them tight so the whole rope could be carried up the stairs at once. A season's onions cost next to nothing when grown at home, and their pungent smell mixed with apples and earth to make the true perfume of a farmhouse cellar. Those hanging braids were both pantry and decoration, a sign of a household that planned ahead. Mesh bags from the supermarket replaced the braid, and the quiet skill of plating onions faded from memory. Number 24. Hubbard squash the size of a cannonball. The great warty Hubbard squash was the champion keeper of the cellar, some weighing 15 pounds or more. Left whole and unwashed on a dry shelf, a good Hubbard could last well past Christmas, its thick blue-gray rind sealing the sweet orange flesh inside. Farm families grew them precisely because they stored so long without canning or freezing. Cracking one open took a hammer or a good drop on the floor, and a single squash could feed a family for days, baked, mashed, or turned into pie. A patch cost nothing but a corner of the garden. Children eyed the monsters with suspicion, but the smell of one roasting meant winter had its comforts. The Hubbard has mostly disappeared, too big and too odd for the modern kitchen. Number 23. Field pumpkins for pie and for hogs. The autumn pumpkin was not just for carving. Farm families hauled dozens into the cellar, where the sound keepers lasted into the new year on a dry shelf off the cold floor. The best became pies and breads through the holidays, while the rest fed the hogs and cows when pasture was gone. A wagon load cost nothing but the seed and the soil. Cut open, a good pumpkin filled the kitchen with a sweet, grassy smell as Mother scraped the flesh for canning. Nothing was wasted, not the seeds roasted for the children, nor the rinds tossed to the livestock. Canned pumpkin in a bright label ended the practice almost overnight, and the cellar shelf that once held a row of them now holds nothing at all. Number 22. Beets nestled in sawdust. Deep red and earthy, beets kept beautifully layered in boxes of sawdust or sand, their color bleeding faintly into the grit. Farm wives grew rows of them for pickling and for the winter table, and a cool cellar held them firm for 4 or 5 months. Pulled out and boiled, they stained fingers and aprons alike, but their sweetness was worth the mess. A whole crop cost only the seed. Some families canned them in vinegar, but the sawdust box kept a fresh supply straight from the ground long after the garden froze. That deep smell of raw beets and damp wood was part of every descent into the cellar. Vacuum-packed and canned beets from the store made the sawdust box obsolete, and the tradition quietly ended. Number 21. Parsnips left to sweeten in frost. The parsnip held a secret every farm family knew. Frost made it sweeter. Many were left in the ground through the first hard freezes, then dug and stored in damp scent, their starches turning to sugar in the cold. A pale, forgotten root today, the parsnip once anchored winter stews and roasts with a nutty sweetness no other vegetable matched. Grown by the row for pennies, it asked only for patience. Farm wives dug them half-frozen from the earth, fingers aching, knowing the reward was worth it. The smell of parsnips roasting in drippings meant a good Sunday dinner even in the leanest February. As tastes narrowed and the supermarket pushed newer vegetables, the parsnip slipped off the American plate, and almost no cellar holds one now. Number 20. Cabbages wrapped and hung by the root. A head of cabbage would rot fast if left in a heap, so the clever farm wife pulled the whole plant, root and all, and hung it upside down from the rafters. Wrapped in newspaper or buried in a straw-lined trench, cabbages kept for months, ready for slaw, soup, or the sauerkraut crock. A wagon load from the garden cost only labor. The faint sulfur smell of a cellar full of cabbage was the price of a winter's worth of vitamins. Families in the northern states depended on those hanging heads when nothing green grew for months. Children carried them up two at a time for supper. When refrigeration made fresh cabbage available all year, the hanging heads came down and the trench went unfilled. Number 19. Sacks of dried beans. Every cellar held burlap sacks of dried beans, the quiet protein that carried a farm family through the coldest stretch. Navy beans, kidney beans, and Great Northerns were shelled after harvest, dried on screens, and stored where mice could not reach. A pound cost mere cents, and a single sack could feed a family for weeks in soups, bakes, and pots simmered slow on the back of the stove. Saturday's bean pot, sweetened with molasses and salt pork, was a ritual across rural America. Mothers scooped them by the cupful from the sack, sorting out stones by hand at the kitchen table. Those beans were insurance against any hungry week. Now they come in small bags or cans, and no cellar holds a 100-pound sack of survival anymore. Number 18. Strings of dried apples. Before the harvest was canned, much of it was dried, and apples led the way. Peeled, cored, and sliced into rings, they were threaded onto string and hung to dry, then coiled and stored in the cellar where they kept for a year or more. Chewy and concentrated, dried apples went into pies, sauces, and lunch pails, sweeter than any fresh fruit in the dead of winter. A bushel dried down to almost nothing, taking little space. Children snuck the leathery rings as candy. The whole family gathered to peel and string on autumn evenings, a chore that doubled as company. When cheap canned and frozen fruit arrived, the strings came down for good, and the patient art of drying apples slipped away. Number 17. Seed corn and popcorn on the cob. The cellar was not only a pantry, but a seed vault. Ears of the best corn hung drying, saved to plant the coming spring, along with strings of popcorn on the cob for winter nights by the stove. Kept cool and dry, the kernels stayed alive and ready. A farm that saved its own seed answered to no one, and the popcorn cost nothing but a corner of the field. Children twisted the hard kernels off by hand, filling a bowl for popping in bacon fat over the flame. The smell of it filling a cold farmhouse was pure joy. When hybrid seed and store-bought popcorn took over, the hanging ears disappeared, and with them a self-reliance that few families keep today. Number 16. A knobby root of horseradish. Tucked in the sand beside the carrots sat a few gnarled roots of horseradish, kept firm for grinding fresh all winter. Nothing from a jar matched the eye-watering bite of a root ground at the kitchen table, and every farm family kept a supply. The plant grew like a weed, so it cost nothing at all. Grinding it was an ordeal, the fumes strong enough to clear a room and bring tears to the toughest farmer, so the job was often done outdoors or by an open window. That fiery relish lifted a plate of boiled beef or a Sunday ham. A single root lasted the season, dug from the sand as needed. Bottled horseradish ended the ritual, and the fresh root vanished from the American cellar. Number 15. Mason jars of tomatoes. When the first frost threatened the garden, farm wives canned tomatoes by the dozens of quarts, and the ruby jars became the pride of the cellar shelf. A summer's abundance was sealed into glass, ready to become soup, sauce, and stew through the long gray months. Lids and rings cost a few cents, but the jars were kept and reused for decades. Rows of them glowed red in the lamplight, proof of a hot week's labor over a steaming kettle. The whole kitchen turned into a canning line, mothers and daughters scalding, peeling, and filling until midnight. Those jars tasted of August in the middle of January. Store-bought cans in every aisle made home canning optional, and most cellar shelves that once blazed with red now stand empty. Number 14. Quarts of green beans snapped by hand. Snap beans came off the vine faster than any family could eat them, so they were canned by the bushel. Farm wives sat on the porch in the evening, breaking beans into pans, an endless summer chore shared by every set of hands in the house. Sealed in jars, they held for a year, ready to simmer with a bit of bacon or onion. A garden row cost almost nothing and gave more than one family could use. The rhythmic snap of beans on a summer night was the sound of a farm putting food by. Down in the cellar, the pale green jars stood in ranks beside the tomatoes. Frozen and canned vegetables from the store ended those long evenings, and the porch-side snapping fell silent. Number 13. Sweet corn sealed in glass. Few flavors captured summer like home-canned sweet corn, cut fresh from the cob at its peak and sealed away. It was one of the trickier vegetables to put up safely, demanding a pressure canner and careful timing, but the reward was corn that tasted of July in the depths of winter. Farm families grew long rows precisely so the cellar could hold jar after golden jar. Husking and cutting corn was a hot, sticky, all-hands affair, the kitchen thick with steam. Children were handed the husking while mothers worked the knife. A supper of that saved corn, buttered and salted, was a small miracle in February. Cheap, canned, and frozen corn made the labor unnecessary, and the golden jars disappeared from the shelf. Number 12. Crocks of sauerkraut. In the corner of many a cellar bubbled a great stoneware crock of sauerkraut, cabbage shredded and salted and left to ferment into something tangy and alive. A weighted plate held the cabbage under its brine, while thyme and salt did the rest, filling the cellar with a sharp, sour smell that meant good eating ahead. A crock cost $1 or $2 and served a family for years. Immigrant traditions from Germany and Eastern Europe kept the kraut crock central across the rural Midwest. Ladled out and cooked with sausage or pork, it brightened the heavy winter table. Making it was a fall ritual as certain as the harvest. Refrigerated bags and cans replaced the crock, and the slow, living art of the kraut barrel nearly vanished. Number 11. pickle crocks, dill, and bread and butter. Alongside the kraut sat crocks of cucumbers curing into pickles, submerged in brine or packed in vinegar and spice. A good crock of dills lasted the winter, pulled out crisp and sour for sandwiches and suppers. Farm wives grew cucumbers by the row and put up gallons because store pickles were an expense a thrifty family avoided. The smell of dill and garlic drifting up the cellar stairs was pure comfort. Children begged for a pickle straight from the brine, hands dripping. Every family guarded its own recipe, the exact balance of salt and spice a matter of quiet pride. Cheap, jarred pickles on every shelf made the crock unnecessary, and the great stoneware jars were carried up and set out in the yard as flower pots. Number 10. Crocks of apple butter. Cooking apple butter was an all-day event. A great copper kettle stirred for hours over an outdoor fire until the fruit turned dark, thick, and spiced. Ladled into crocks and jars, it lived in the cellar and sweetened bread and biscuits clear through spring. The apples came free from the family's own trees, so a winter's supply cost only firewood and a long day's stirring. The whole neighborhood sometimes gathered to make it, taking turns at the paddle so the batch never scorched. That smell of cinnamon and simmering apples carried for a mile. A spoonful on a warm biscuit was a small luxury in a hard season. Store shelves full of jam and spread ended the kettle days, and the apple butter crock became a relic. Number 9. Rows of jams, jellies, and preserves. The sweetest shelf in the cellar held the year's jams and jellies, wild strawberry and blackberry and grape, each jar sealed with a disc of paraffin wax poured hot across the top. Farm families foraged and grew their own fruit, so a whole winter of sweetness cost only sugar and labor. Those jewel-colored jars caught the lamplight like stained glass. Making them was a race against the ripening fruit, the kitchen sticky and steaming through July. A spoonful of grape jelly on bread was a child's reward and a mother's pride. Every jar meant a summer afternoon saved in glass. When cheap commercial preserves filled the supermarket, the wax and the kettles were put away, and the glowing shelf of homemade jars slowly emptied. Number 8. Eggs preserved in water glass. Hens lay little in the dark of winter, so farm wives put up eggs in the fall, using a trick almost no one remembers: water glass, a solution of sodium silicate that sealed each shell and kept the eggs fresh for months. Submerged in a crock of the cloudy liquid, eggs laid in September stayed good through the following spring. A can of water glass cost only pennies and preserved dozens of dozens. It meant baking and breakfast continued even when the hens went quiet. Mother fished the eggs out one by one, rinsing off the slick coating before cracking. It was ordinary farm knowledge, common as dirt. When reliable refrigeration and year-round store eggs arrived, water glass vanished so completely that most people today have never heard the word. Number 7. Butter crocks under brine. Before the refrigerator, keeping butter meant burying it in salt or brine down in the cool of the cellar. Farm wives churned their own, then packed the golden pounds into stoneware crocks, sometimes topped with a layer of salted water to seal out air. Stored cold and dark, it kept for weeks without spoiling. A crock of home-churned butter was worth real money, so none was wasted. The rich, faintly tangy taste of that cellar butter beat anything wrapped in foil today. Churning was a chore handed to the children, the dasher thumping for what felt like hours. That butter melted into everything a farm kitchen made. The electric refrigerator made the brine crock pointless overnight, and home churning nearly disappeared within a generation. Number 6. Tins of rendered lard. Every farm that raised a hog rendered its fat into lard, and the cellar held it by the tin and crock, snow-white and clean. Lard was the kitchen's workhorse, the fat for pie crust, biscuits, frying, and frying again. Rendered from the family's own pig, it cost nothing beyond the day's labor at the kettle. Kept cool in the cellar, a good batch lasted the better part of a year without turning. Farm cooks swore no crust was flakier than one made with fresh lard. The rendering was a fall ritual tied to butchering, the whole place smelling of hot fat and cracklings. Children waited for those crispy bits as a treat. Vegetable shortening and vilified fat drove lard from the kitchen, and the cellar tins ran dry. Number 5. The salt pork barrel. In the coldest corner stood the salt pork barrel, slabs of fatty pork packed in coarse salt that kept for a year or more without a lick of refrigeration. This was the meat that flavored 1,000 pots of beans, greens, and chowder when fresh meat was scarce. A hog butchered in November filled the barrel and fed the family for months. Salt was cheap, and the method was ancient and dependable. A cook fished out a chunk, soaked away the salt, and dropped it in the pot to season the whole meal. That barrel was the difference between a bland winter and a nourishing one. Cheap, fresh meat at the market, and the home freezer made salting obsolete, and the pork barrel rotted away in forgotten cellars. Number 4. Cured hams wrapped in muslin. Perhaps the proudest thing hanging in a farmhouse cellar was the home-cured ham, rubbed with salt and sugar, smoked, then wrapped in muslin or paper and hung to age. A well-cured ham improved for months, developing a deep, complex flavor no store ham could touch. Butchering and curing were skills passed down carefully, a matter of family reputation. A single hog gave hams that anchored Sunday dinners and holiday tables all winter long. The wrapped shapes hanging in the cool dark were a sign of a farm that had done its work well. Cutting the first slice off a ham cured by hand was a small ceremony. When packaged ham filled the meat case, the old curing knowledge faded and the hanging hams disappeared. Number 3. Wheels of homemade cheese. On many farms with a milk cow, the cellar held wheels of homemade cheese, pressed from surplus milk and left to age on cool shelves. Turning fresh milk into cheese was one of the oldest ways to keep it from spoiling, and a good wheel aged for months into something sharp and fine. The milk cost nothing beyond the cow's keep, and the family ate cheese all winter and that money could not buy. Making it was patient, exacting work, the curds cut and pressed and salted just so. Few skills separated a capable farm wife from a great one like a properly aged wheel. That cheese, cut thick for a winter supper, tasted of the whole summer's grass. Cheap store cheese ended home cheesemaking, and the aging shelves stood bare. Number 2. Barrels of cider working in the dark. When the apple harvest overflowed, much of it went to the press, and barrels of cider were rolled into the cellar to work slowly in the cool dark. Fresh, sweet cider, kept for a while, then naturally turned to hard cider over the winter, a farmhouse drink as old as the country itself. A wagon of windfall apples cost nothing but the gathering. The cellar filled with that sharp, heady apple smell as the barrels quietly did their work. Cider was poured at supper, offered to visitors, and cooked into vinegar when it soured past drinking. Nothing from the orchard went to waste. As commercial soft drinks and store beverages took over, the home cider barrel emptied, for the last time, and the presses rusted in the barns. Number 1, the whole hog put by for winter. At the very heart of the cellar was the fruit of butchering day, the whole hog transformed into a winter's food, the sausage packed into crocks and sealed under its own lard, the head cheese set in molds, the fat rendered, the meat salted and smoked and stored. Come the first hard freeze, the family gathered for the great task, and every scrap found its place. Nothing was wasted, from the hams down to the feet. Weeks of labor filled the cellar with enough to carry the household from December to spring. That knowledge, how to turn one animal into a season of meals, was the deepest wisdom a farm family owned. The freezer and the supermarket made it unnecessary, and one of the oldest skills in rural America quietly slipped underground for the last time. From a bin of potatoes to a whole hog put by, these 30 things tell one story. A family that fed itself through its own labor, wasting nothing and planning for every hungry week. The refrigerator, the freezer, and the bright supermarket aisle gave us convenience, but they emptied the cellar and carried away the skills that filled it. Your great-grandparents knew how to survive a winter with nothing but a cool stone room and their own 2 hands. Which of these do you remember or wish you still knew how to do? Tell me in the comments, because this wisdom was never meant to be forgotten.